Okay. Uh, this presentation is about AI scraping. I'm calling it Weathering the Storm. I think that many of us have experienced over the last probably 3 years now just an increasing amount of traffic spikes on our sites. And this talk is about that. I'm Rob Kaufman. I work with the folks at Notch 8. My pronouns are he, him, or as my son told me the other day, my pronouns are dude and bro, which I don't know how I feel about, but it's something I'm working through. All right. I think the stability of the internet as a whole has changed dramatically in the last, I'm going to say, 3 to 5 years. We have been on this trend for a long time now for more and more walled gardens, more and more things locked away, and the free and open internet becoming less populated and less easily seen. And then with the rise in LLMs, we've been seeing just a tremendous land rush for data. Um, and the biggest reason to talk about this is that this impacts the users of our systems, especially for large library archives. I think that there is a period starting maybe January 2024 where you could say, like, this is the day the LLM folks figured out that there was a bunch of human readable data in our repository systems and started coming for them in droves. Um, this impacts our users. It makes it hard for humans to use the sites. It means down servers and alerts in the middle of the night. It means that new restrictions on access are happening. Things are getting locked behind more logins. Things are less accessible to the open internet. I think that we've seen things that traditionally, a good example is like tweets and Reddit posts used to be searchable in Google, and they're just not anymore because those companies want to monetize that data, and so they're locking it away. And it also means like lost features and progress on things because we're spending our resources trying to keep the sites up instead of building new features. Um, just as a sort of anecdotal from our little Notch 8 neck of the woods, we've seen multiple sites go through multiple waves of, just truly brutal 10,000, 20,000 requests per minute uh, bot scraping cycles. There have been a couple times where, and I don't know, it makes me feel like it has to be one company where the British Library will experience an issue at, like, let's say midnight, 1 o'clock my time here on the Pacific West Coast, and then the Cal State Repository will get the same issue at 10 o'clock. And it's almost like someone has a list and they're just going down and hitting it with their new bot scraper. And we've seen a few times where it's like essentially this wave that goes through all of our various repositories, and in an almost predictable order, which is strange to me. But I think we've seen just a lot of this kind of issue. All right. Bot traffic now accounts for over 51% of all internet traffic, according to some estimates, which surpasses human traffic. And among this, about 37% is considered to be malicious traffic. So these are bots that aren't respecting the stop signs and the kind approach that they're supposed to. So, a good example of the difference between a malicious bot and a non-malicious bot isn't really what they're going to do with that information. It has more to do with the way the bot behaves. So, a malicious bot isn't going to accept the fact that you have stated that you want people to do, you know, maybe 5 requests per second. They're going to do hundreds or thousands of requests per second. And whereas a well-behaved bot is going to, respect those limits. The other thing that is kind of characterizes a bad bot is it may or may not have a legitimate user tag. So all traffic on the internet comes with a little header that says who it's from, what browser it's from, if it's from an internet browser, or what the bot is if it's from a bot. If you're using curl, it says it's from curl. If you're using Firefox, it says it's from Firefox. The reality is those name badges are optional and are sent by the user, and you're allowed to just take your name badge off and write something else on the name badge and put a new name badge on. So we have seen examples in the last year of several bots pretending to be the Google bot. Now we want the Google bot, especially the Google Scholar bot, to come and walk through our sites and index them. And so it's really hard if someone's wearing the Google bot's name badge, but they're not the Google bot, and they're coming in and kind of maliciously scraping our traffic. I do want to say that this is not a new issue. Like, this is something that has been a problem throughout the history of the internet. It's just really reached massive new heights. Um, where we would see maybe one attack across all of our clientele in a year, maybe two if we had some high, quote unquote, high value targets. We're now seeing this, on a monthly basis in multiple places. Should we block this traffic? I think that this is an interesting existential question for each repository that you have to think about. There is an argument to be made, and we had a really good conversation, I want to say, at Connect 2 years ago, that the goal of open repositories is for this information to be open, which means that these companies have as much right to it as any other individual out there. And I think that that's a fair and legitimate question, and one that we have to kind of ask ourselves. Um, but I do think that there is a good case to be limiting or blocking some of these bots for a couple reasons. One, because this informational land grab isn't for egalitarian purposes of any kind, right? Like, they aren't taking that information and turning around and making it free in their modified form. They're taking that information and turning it into a profit generation machine, and then using that to make arguments to corporations to cut people's jobs. And I think that that fundamental, like, replacement theory of, these AI agents are going to take over the economy, like that, we become complicit in that, like, malicious monetary grab, and that's not great. The other thing that's fundamentally true is, like, I think that if the bots are behaving, no one's out there trying to block them. What we are seeing is, massive floods of traffic demanding, all of your resources, and taking up all of the, like, shared space. If we think of your ability to view a repository as a shared community resource, like, these folks are hoarding. And I don't think we need to be nice to the hoarders necessarily. So let's talk about the classic. Robots.txt is something that has been around since the early scrapers in the late 90s, early 2000s started to make their appearance. And the goal of this is a text file that you serve from your site, that tells or scrapers or any bot how to handle your site. The two big pieces, or three pieces of this, is you specify a list of one or more user agents, which is those name tags we talked about before. You tell them what is allowed and what is not allowed. You might map out your site to make it faster for them to crawl it. And then you can specify a crawl delay in seconds. So, or in requests per second, sorry. So you might say crawl delay 5, and that means do no more than 5 requests per second. This is all voluntary on the side of the scraper. So the bot is supposed to respect this, and sometimes they do. Um, Even the best citizens aren't great here, frankly. Good examples of places where there's been real problems. There was a long time where the Bing bot, the bot that powers the Bing search engine, only respected disallow and wouldn't respect allow. And the Google bot, very famously for over a decade now, uses its own algorithm to determine how quickly to crawl your site, and completely ignores any crawl delay. Basically, it's decided that, or its developers has decided that they're smarter than you, and so they don't respect that particular limit. So this is the, like, if everyone was a good citizen, we just do this and we'd be done approach. And unfortunately, that's just not the world we get to live in right now. Let's talk about WAF. What does WAF mean? WAF could mean wife acceptance factor. with all faults, which is a legal term, wasn't actually finished, which is my personal favorite from this list, waiting around forever, which is what happens when the bots are scraping your sites, or web application firewall. We're going to talk about WAF as the web application firewall. And these are generally associated with cloud services, though you can do software-based WAFs in local networks. So there are WAF projects from AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. These are looking at the traffic that comes in, typically at a very high level before it hits any kind of load balancer or other part of your infrastructure, and it's going to look at the user agent string, it's going to look at the IP address, and it's going to look at the number of queries from that IP address set. Is that they fundamentally they sort of shape that traffic coming into your thing. These are great if you happen to be in a situation where one can be set up. They often have to be very, very high level. So, for example, if you're in a cluster, like a Kubernetes cluster that's shared amongst other resources, the WAF can be tricky to configure to affect just your service versus other services. So this makes allowing certain kinds of traffic hard. So, like for example, if you want OAMI PMH, or you want this one professor in Germany who has a bunch of Python scripts to scrape your site on that he does regularly for a research paper, like it's harder to like do that on a like per application level. The other thing is these can be pricey. They're not fundamentally cheap. They're big enterprise pieces of software. And so they can drive up your cloud bill. And, in a time when cloud bill prices have been increasing pretty steadily, I think that, that is something that has to be factored in. Like other things that up your cloud bill is certainly a big push right now. And WAFs are sort of one of those things. Hardware load balancers. This is a traditional way of tackling this particular problem. And like the folks at F5 have been working to modernize their software to better support this sort of blocking. These tend to get behind. They're very expensive. You have to, you need to have hardware probably on campus or in a data center to have one of these, and they're not as fresh typically as you would like them to be. So they'll be doing a great job of blocking the traffic from 6 months ago, but maybe not as dynamic as we would like them to be. And then there's Cloudflare. Cloudflare, I think, is a really great solution. They've done a good job of just sort of finding a niche where they're making very good profits, but they're also serving a wide variety of communities for free or for very inexpensively. And so, like the borders in Cloudflare are really, I think, clear and help you differentiate its services from a lot of the other providers that try and do things like this. Cloudflare will do two things for you if it is set up correctly. One, it will proxy your site so that it is able to do WAF type shaping of traffic. And then the other is it will cache pages. So with any caching, you have to be careful because you can have you can have issues with caching. But fundamentally, it is nice to be able to have kind of both those things. So with a Cloudflare backing, um, it can really help you sort of serve more traffic than you could fundamentally serve on your existing hardware. But you do have to watch for cache and validation things. All right. One drawback of Cloudflare has been that you have to move your whole DNS. And so, for example, if you're UC San Diego or the British Library, like you're probably not going to get the entire campus to change their DNS provider in order for you to use Cloudflare. Whether that's a good idea for them to do or not, there's a lot of inertia there, and your repository probably doesn't have the chutzpah behind it to get the whole thing moved over. So that's been a major drawback of Cloudflare for some time, which is why they fixed it. So you can now use this thing called custom host names, which allows you to take a subdomain or a subdomain and point that at Cloudflare without having to move the whole domain over. This is a huge win for folks like Notch 8, where we have lots of customers that aren't going to change their fundamental DNS for a whole campus or for a whole institution. And so this allows us to take those individual sites and bring them over, configure them through Cloudflare, and get all of the benefits of proxying, et cetera. I do see the chat, and I am going to get to both of those two things. All right, let's take it down a level. We've been talking kind of big infrastructure traffic before it gets anywhere near your particular application. So now let's talk about putting Nginx or Apache in front of a Samvera application. And there are a couple ways you can tackle blocking there. The My personal favorite is the ultimate bad bot blocker, and not just because it has like this really heavy metal logo. There's one for Nginx. There's a version for Apache. This is a basically constantly updated list of bots and blocking tools that you can use and have fairly close to your application, like at the layer. This is also where things like mod security, there's mod proxy limiter, there's a bunch of different Nginx and Apache plugins that you can do to try and shape and block traffic. One issue with throttling at this level is that these requests don't necessarily differentiate between um, asset requests and page requests. So for example, if I'm loading a catalog page, I might have, there's the page load, there's maybe 3 or 4 JavaScript assets and a couple CSS files, and then all of those thumbnails that I want to display are individual loads. So it isn't just, I can't just say, oh, look, each page load is 10 or 20. Like it could be 30 or 40 assets that can be really dynamic. So you have to really watch the tuning here to make sure that you're not blocking like legitimate real requests. The other thing that I think is a little problematic with our specific use case is it is typical for people to run a search and then page fairly quickly through that search to try and find what they're looking for. And so we want to keep that snappy and possible and not block out real users, which is a little tricky to do at this level, but can fundamentally be done and can get you some significant performance improvements. The other thing about tuning at this like Nginx Apache level that's really critical is you should be serving your static assets, images, CSS, JavaScript from Apache or Nginx. It's super good at serving static files, and Rails takes a lot of extra time to do that same work and is a much bigger way of doing it, right? So I think that having something at this layer makes a lot of sense. And then let's get all the way down to the actual Rails application itself. There are 4 or 5 different Rails rack-based plugins. Rack is the layer of Rails that handles the like initial request response cycle. This is not the Rack Attack logo. The Rack Attack logo is a weird looking rack that seems like it might be falling. This is for a bike shop in Portland that I've been to a few times. So I just think it has a better logo, so I stole it for this presentation. So shout out to the Rack Attack bike shop in Portland. But Rack Attack, I think, is something that this is at the application layer. And what's interesting about this more than anything to me is this is where we as a community can start having some possible defaults. And knowing what the tuning is, knowing what a reasonable set of a place to start might be as a shared group is, I think, really valuable, and not having to come up with these things all the time. We need layers. So it isn't really good enough to just do a WAF or Cloudflare. Anubis is an open source WAF that's kind of fairly new on the scene, and is kind of gaining some ground. There's also oh shoot, now I can't remember the name of it, but there's one that's it's all llamas in their logo. CrowdSec, which is another open source version. So there's a lot of possibilities out there. But if you do things at the very top level, it's still possible for traffic to come into your cluster or into your site by going directly to the IP address, in which case they'll skip the WAF. Or often it's common in that scenario to have like deploy URLs versus the production URLs because you might need to be able to see things without the caching on. And so that the bots will find those and they will not have any respect for you like at all. They will just come and get you. So it's important to like be aware that there's sort of ways around that top level piece, and you can work hard to lock it down. That's worth doing, but I think it's good to have some layers here when it comes to these things because I don't like getting up in the middle of the night when a site's down, and so I like to have a few layers of protection if at all possible. All right, we're into the home stretch here. What if we want to make this info available? What if we, especially if we're a data repository, we might be interested in helping open source models be able to grow? I think the folks that like have worked on the Quinn models or some of these more open models, they need the ability to get these resources also. And I think that there are a few options, and I think that making it a little more deliberate and making it clear how to get that information is a good way sort of around it. Like I feel better about locking all the doors and windows if I have a doorbell that you can press the button on. Um, so I do think that configurability becomes a critical thing. So being able to allow the Google bot, being able to shape that traffic so that it comes in a reasonable pacing, being able to, and it's not just the Google bot. You really want Google and you want the Bing bot and you want, two or three others that are, sort of legitimately indexing the internet and making your things findable. Um, I think making the actual assets and maybe their metadata available as a BitTorrent or as a like statically downloadable version can be a really important way to handle this. Like this is a thing that you can make available. Making sure there's a working contact form so that a researcher can reach out and say, hey, I've been scraping your site with my Python script and it's not working. Can you whitelist me? Can you help me? Or allow list me? Can you help me move through that? Like making that something that is clearly an invitation on your site somewhere. Probably not super prominent because it's for a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of your audience, but having it there somewhere, I think really helps folks know that that's something that you're open to, and then having something that's easy to configure. Again, something like Cloudflare or that you can do at this high level, I think is really valuable in that regard because it's a few clicks away to get that rule opened up. But if you don't have access to whatever the large WAF configuration is, then if you're doing that control at your application layer, then whatever it is you have access to that you can control, so that if you get one of those requests, you can turn them around fairly quickly. I think really helps maintain that community spirit. I also think that making good use of protocols like OMIPMH um, and the core stuff that we just heard from Paul about, like those sort of sublayer things, I think become really useful and interesting. And those protocols aren't really being adopted by these, large kind of industrial scrapers, and so they're still fairly safe. I will tell you that there are bots already that come for your RSS feed, and they will hammer your site based on RSS. Um, and so you can whitelist and blacklist individuals in something like your Cloudflare or your Amazon WAF, and just like kind of customize those rules. And it's just going to be a thing we're going to have to maintain. None of the solutions out there are perfect. There are gaps. There are new things coming on the scene. There are organizations that are being really just fundamentally shady about the way that they're attacking this problem. And so it's going to continue to be an issue now and into the future. But by putting a couple of these layers in place, like you really up your chances of being able to avoid like large, big pieces. Uh, all right. That's it for my slides. Any questions?